Kia ora and welcome to the 100th episode of Talking Dairy. I'm Jac McGowan and I want to start by saying a big thank you to our listeners. Whether you've been here since episode 1 or just recently tuned in, this podcast exists because of you. I've been hosting for about a year and it's still such a buzz for me. Each podcast is an adventure and it's such a privilege to meet and interview our guests and help them share their stories. So, an extra special shout out to our guests who have joined us over the years too. We couldn't have done it without you. Since it's officially our 100th episode, we thought we'd take a big swing and ask a couple of big questions. How did New Zealand farmers earn the title of the world's lowest cost milk producers? And what will it take to keep that edge in the years ahead? We're digging into the science that shaped our farming systems and shining a light on some of the quiet legends behind the scenes who helped make it happen. Then we're looking to the future. With new challenges on the horizon, what role will research and innovation play in helping you farm smarter, stay profitable, and help keep New Zealand dairy strong? Joining me are two people with a front row seat to this story, DairyNZ Chief Scientist Bruce Thorrold and Chief Executive Campbell Parker. Let's get into it. Tēnā korua, welcome back to Talking Dairy.
Kia ora, Jac. Great to be back. It feels like it's ages since I did one of these.
Yeah, kia ora, Jac. Great to be with you and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. All right, we'll start with you, Campbell. Since it's our 100th episode, it feels like the perfect moment to take stock. In your view, what's made New Zealand dairy such a global success story, and why is science such a big part of that?
New Zealand's status in world-leading low-cost milk production is built on decades of smart farmer-funded research. And that farmer-funded research through the levy is what's made possible. It's delivered practical on-farm solutions that help keep New Zealand globally competitive. And if I look back to the history, I think about the days of DRC, well-known, Dairy Insight, Dexcel, and now DairyNZ. And it's about the science as well as then turning that into tools and practical uptake and adoption on farm. And a great example of that is something we take for granted today. For example, the spring rotation planner, which started with science, developed into a tool, well-known scientists, Arnold Bryant and Kevin McDonald, and then work with our team to turn it into a tool that's, often in cowsheds around and commonplace today. But we forget sometimes that it came from science.
Thank you. And Bruce, you've been close to the science side of this story. If we dropped in on a typical New Zealand dairy farm 30 or 40 years ago, how different would it look compared to today?
Yeah, 40 years ago, that's 1985. I had to go back and dig up some numbers and I could hardly believe them myself, Jac.
How rude that we asked you that question.
Yeah, it's 147 cows was the average herd size. If you wanted to join the Large Herds Association, you had to have more than 300 cows in your herd. 2.3 million cows, so less than half what we had today. And average production was 650 kilos of milk solids per hectare. So those farms, very different to how they are today, not in the fundamentals, as Campbell said, in terms of pasture harvest and people, but very different. And, things like effluent management probably weren't to the same high standard they are today. So, we've come a long way from that. And farmers have changed too. We're just people, but we've changed. Neil Bateup tells a great story about in the early days of once-a-day milking. He was talking to a young couple down the road and they said they'd gone to once-a-day milking, but they milked half the herd in the morning and half the herd in the afternoon, so the neighbours didn't think they were lazy. Today, less than half the cows in the national herd are milked twice a day all season, so everything changes.
Yeah.
I think, Bruce, the other point I'd make is the core to that has always been farmer-to-farmer learning. So, I've been in and around the sector, not quite as long as you, but when I look back to how transfer of knowledge happens, that's a really key point that sets New Zealand dairy farmers apart from other dairy farmers around the world. This ability to come together and openly share and improve their farm systems is a core to New Zealand's success.
And I understand envied by other dairy sectors around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not until you talk to farmers, Jac, that have gone and experienced offshore and look back, who reflect on how fortunate we are to be in that position in New Zealand.
Bruce, you've worked with some of the most influential scientists in the sector. We've heard some of those names already. Kevin McDonald, Jenny Jago, Jane Kay, Chris Glassy, John Roach, who's now the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, just to name a few. What kind of thinking did they bring to the table, and how did their work show up on farm?
Yes, Jack, those are all important people. And I was thinking about our broader teams as well. Yeah, so in all the time I've been here, we've focused on building the best teams we can from all across the sector to help farmers. So it's people like Colin Holmes from Massey University, Stuart Ledgard and Dana Selby from Ag Research, Keith Cameron, Trish Fraser, who very sadly passed away last month. So, the best teams. And all of those people have been committed to finding solutions, solving the problems, seizing the opportunities, and working collaboratively and with farmers to do that. And it's not just, kind of big picture systems research. It's digging down into the detail of how do inhibitors work, how does nitrogen cycle, how does genetic gain work. It's the full range of science skills that we've always been able to tap into, benefiting from farmers' investment. The point that Campbell made before, dairy farmers right from the DRC days have said that we have to invest in our future and we have to invest in science and put levy money and our own money on the table. We can't expect the government to do it all for us. What
drives our science, our scientific inquiry?
I think some of it's very personal. So scientists just love finding stuff out. That's what gets us out of bed in the morning. But there's something about working with the sector and with the quality of people who are out there farming that's also very motivating. And all those people I talked about, they share a motivation that what they do matters. Dairy farming is a big deal. It's a big slice of the economy. It's a big slice of the environment. There's 30,000 people out there on farms for whom what we do is really important. So that's highly motivating for the scientists who are part of our big team.
Thank you, Bruce. Campbell, when you look at New Zealand dairy, what role has science played in helping farmers stay efficient and competitive, not just locally, but globally?
Look, I think the role of science is absolutely critical. Farmers are innovators, and the work that DairyNZ does is about amplifying that by rigorously testing ideas and scaling up those solutions. So when I talked earlier about the likes of the spring rotation planner, came from some of the research around tiller development and growth stage and products. And it's really interesting because you look at it going even further now. So that research has actually been taken and used by some of the new technology providers in providing solutions that are now used to manage things better on farms. So there's a real intersect between farmer innovation and desire for change and how science helps solve for some of those problems. So, Bruce talked about once a day milking. That's a great example of farmers testing things and then working through with us. But there's equally deep examples of great science work that's led to what we consider today to be some of the things we take for granted on farm or think about differently. And I look at the practices on farm in the last 15 years and how much they've changed. But if you look at some of our deep research into nitrate leaching and those pieces, which now enable farmers to have tools, but also how they feed through, even into processes, and still room for improvement with council processes. But without the science, it would be hard to get the policy settings right as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point Campbell's just made, Jack. The drivers come in from a number of directions. It's farmer innovation and need, it's regulation, it's consumers, and our science strategy is set up to understand and deliver on all those drivers for farmers.
And I think that the levy, Bruce, ensures that those farmer-driven innovations receive the credibility they need and the scientific backing, and then they're for sector-wide benefit, and other farmers can adopt best practice and continue to push the frontier forward. And that's always been at the heart of kind of what I think makes the dairy industry in New Zealand so, both special but different than, as you said, Jack, on the world stage.
Yeah, that levy enables us to work as a team, and we use it to leverage money out of government as well. So 30 years ago, farmers set up DRC to achieve the things we're achieving today.
And Bruce, let's name a few standout innovations or achievements that have changed the game. What's on your list of the top 3 or 4, the breakthroughs that had real on-farm impact?
Yeah, breakthroughs are kind of interesting, because the science accumulates. I was going, what's a real breakthrough we've made? And I'm going, I'm struggling to think of any kind of one moment that step changed us. But to give you some good examples of how science and farmer experience and business innovation have just driven improvement over time. Campbell's already talked about once a day milking. So once a day, 3 and 2, Brent Boyce and the guys in the North and South Island, and then 10 and 7 because 3 and 2 didn't work for rosters on big farms. And we've just built up that understanding. And now LIC has a variable index, milking index to breed cows from. Over half the farmers in the country use some kind of variable milking at some stage in the season. It's over 40 years, it's transformed.
I bet it feels like a breakthrough, though, for the individual farmer when they make that shift.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole sector shifts one farm at a time in these areas. I think there's really interesting work that's been done on the use of supplements. You go back to 1985, people made pit silage. I don't think there were any wrap bales around then. And there was a bit of maize silage grown, but not a lot. And now, of course, big amounts of maize silage, other supplements in the South Island, PKE coming in. Over 40 years, the science has been done, first of all, at an animal level, nutrition. How do animals as individuals respond to supplement feeding? But then really importantly, at a system level. So how do we put supplements into systems in ways that maximise the impact they have? And so if you go back to the 1.75 tonne trial in the 1990s, very production focused, pretty modest responses to supplements, less than 100 grams of milk solids per kilo of dry matter. And then you contrast that with the more recent work at places like NAF and down in Taranaki, where those systems have been tuned up for profitability, and now we're seeing large responses, 120 grams of milk solids per kilo of dry matter coming in the gate, body condition score, resilience to climate change, all those things being systemised in the way we use supplements. So that's been a big shift over 30 years. And if you want another one, Jack, here's another one. Nitrogen fertilisers, nitrate leaching. 40 years ago, we didn't use nitrogen fertiliser, not because it didn't exist. And farmers in the UK were using 400 or 500 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, but because economically it didn't stack up. Once milk price started to shift, we started to use nitrogen fertiliser through the 90s. By 2000, we had lakes like Rotorua and Taupo seen as nitrogen limiting, and the policies started to change. So, 25 years of research later, we have systems leaching 50% less than, a high efficiency system in our low-end work in Canterbury, which is giving, as Campbell says, it's giving us clear input into policy about what works, and it's giving farmers options to farm with high productivity but low nitrogen footprint.
And I think, Bruce, one of the other ones I'd just call out is the importance of homegrown feed and the link to profitability, and how data and insight at a sector level, think about things like Dairy Base, the ability to model that and show through analysis of the data, we have the deep correlation between homegrown feed harvested and turned into profit. And we should never lose sight of that. That's one of New Zealand's competitive advantage of being in a pastoral system that grows grass all year round. But the science is really important, and data is becoming even more important to, I think, around how we unlock future opportunities to think about the tools and the insights farmers have to make even better decisions on farm.
Yeah, I agree. Research using the data we have now it's really important. As you say, detecting long-term trends, pasture harvest is flat. That's a problem for us, given how important it is to the sector. And, big data around animal genetics and the use of genomic selection, all good examples of research that rely on a systemised collection of data.
Bruce, you mentioned policy changes. I have a note here about splitting gas or ag out of ETS. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, split gas approaches, methane, emissions pricing, they've been really hot topics for the last 5 or more years. Hei Waka Eke Noa, the sector worked really hard on that to come up with a plan, and in the end that fell over with the politics of it. But that has all depended on really good science, and here's a great example of science that the sector has contracted other experts in to do. So what's the warming potential? The work that David Frame and others have done for us has really moved the science and the debate along. So we now have a split gas approach to managing emissions in New Zealand, where biogenic methane from ruminants is treated differently to carbon dioxide from fossil fuels. keeping out of the ETS, and now the investment that's going into technology to reduce methane is going to be a really important part of us staying internationally competitive in terms of our emissions efficiency, meeting our national obligations, but doing all that in a way that lets dairy farming keep on driving the economy.
Okay, so to both of you, looking to today's challenges, one of which is climate change, emissions targets, tighter margins, how is research helping New Zealand dairy farming stay one step ahead?
There's some really important research work we're doing to help solve for some of those challenges. And, my time here over the last 18 months, one of the things I've learned from our science teams is sometimes the science we do means that we can learn from those things rather than farmers having to take that risk on and learn from themselves. So there's lots, but, when I look at some of those bigger challenges that do come at us, there are also opportunities. So the work we're doing, for example, in the Pasture for Emissions project in partnership with the Irish, who's also a strong pasture-based system, how do we learn together? How do we build on accurate data to, quantify the effects, but also the different seasonality of that, because that becomes important when you think about what Bruce said, some of the technologies that will come available, but what's the right time to use them in the farm system context? You can't do that without the research and understanding all of the, the deep detail around that. So, that's an example of science that'll come. The big data piece is really interesting for me about how do we, we're collecting a lot more data on animals now. We've got more than 20% of the national herd using some form of heat detection technology. How do those big data sets get used to unlock where other opportunities could be? Is it in things like pre-mating heats, different types of traits that are needed that mean farmers have more confidence about the genetic selections they make and breeding from the right animals at the right time to drive both productivity and performance and profitability. So I still think there's a lot we can learn from those data sets. And if you look at the trend of uptake of that in the last 5 years, I think we're scratching the surface of what that could unlock. But we've got to tie that data and the science to then turn that into, again, as history has proven, practical tools for farmers that give confidence to adopt and change.
Yeah, and that's a great example, Campbell, of how the technology and science gets delivered to farmers in all sorts of ways. Better bulls, breeding worth, genomics, that just turns up when your AI tech comes up the driveway. The things that we can get embedded in the technology providers, Holter, AIMA and people like that, that's, again, it's delivered through a different channel. So really understanding that farmers access information and innovation in all sorts of ways, farmer to farmer through their commercial companies, that's really important. And when we need to do our science with those delivery channels in mind.
Yeah, and I think the other one that will and has been critical to our success in the past and will continue to be is, how do we work with other partners across the sector to collectively, solve for some of these challenges? So, we think about climate change and particularly in the upper north of the North Island, which is, moving over time, the work we do around things like different pasture species that may be able to adapt to that a bit more and still keep the essence of our homegrown feed, but how that's tested out, working with partners to have solutions that we might need in 5-7 years' time, keeping ahead of that. So, our teams have got to stay connected globally to what the trends are and then think about the New Zealand context and what's the work we need to do on behalf of farmers.
Campbell, you just talked about long-term science, long-term innovation. Can take years to pay off. How do you balance the need for immediate solutions with those long-term projects? And how do we make sure farmers, keep the faith while we're working on that stuff, the long-term things?
Yeah, I think it's a real balance. We actually had a very interesting discussion, Bruce and I were both part of with our board around that exact subject. What's the balance of short-term immediate versus longer term, and how do we balance that up? Because there will always be a mix. But I think that, one of the things that becomes really important in that is, are we clear about what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the right way to do that? Are we best placed to play? Who else can we work with? And some of those things will take long. Bruce mentioned earlier the work we've learned over the last 25 years in the nitrate space. We wouldn't have some of the stacked technology solutions for farmers today if we hadn't have started that work 25 years ago. So, Bruce, you're the scientist, I'm not, but how do you think about that in terms of the balance of immediate versus longer term?
To me, Campbell, it's like you said, what are the big problems we try to solve? We always have a pipeline of science. We don't start everything on day one and then finish it all on, end of year 10. There's always kind of a revolving program of science. So, new work starting up around bobby calves and how we can grow the profitability of dairy beef farming and increase the demand for that and the outlet from calves from our farms. That's pretty new, but Palmer and LIC and Beef and Lamb have been doing work on that already, so that evolves. The work we're doing on wintering, goes back 20 years, and in the last 4 or 5 years, it's delivered the basis of changes in farm practice in a hurry down in South and Otago. So it evolves, and if we get short-term issues that pop up, then we address those. But our focus is dominantly on the long-term big issues facing the sector.
Okay.
I'll give you an example of a short-term issue that popped up that we then had to respond to. So you'd recall that probably a decade ago, we had some problems with Swedes, HT Swedes down in Southland.
That's right.
And working with the commercial sector and farmers, we were able to mobilise a very rapid research response and understand what was going on and give farmers advice quickly. And then over the next year, give them better advice to stop a repeat of that in future years. So when we hit crunch time, we can respond and mobilise quickly, as well as, keeping these long-term issues moving along.
How important is farmer involvement in shaping what research gets done? And are there ways farmers can help drive that innovation, what DairyNZ's doing?
I think at last count, we had something like 1,000 farmers working with us in our research programs at all stages. So the answer is, farmer engagement is really important. It's important around getting the question right, and it's really important around understanding how the way we do our science needs to transfer through to farm practice, so that we measure the whole suite of indicators. We don't just focus on one part of it. We think about the system and how this is going to impact the system. And farmers are really important in terms of their input into how we do the science and really keeping it of high quality and usable.
Give us some examples of how farmers might be involved.
Some really good examples in the people productivity space. We started off with a series of workshops with farmers to understand what the problem was, and we boiled it down to peaky labour distribution through the day and through the year. And farmers have then worked with us in variable milking technology. We've had pilot studies on farms, and now with the extended lactation work, we've got a partner farm who is right now having a crack at this at the same time as we are researching it at Scott Farm and learning from each other. And if there are any other farmers out there listening to this who are keen to give calving half the herd every second year a crack, Paul Edwards would love to hear from you. We want more farmer engagement on this.
I think, Bruce, another good example is, if you think about some of the work we're doing in the future pasture species space, so resilient pastures in Northland and that piece of work, that will have a lot of farmer input into it. It will have some research that's done, as I understand it, both at the likes of the research farm at Naarth and Northland, but it'll also have some pieces tested out and commercially trialled on farms. So, my take is farmer input's vital. Some of DairyNZ's best innovations are from that ideas of farmers, but also the input into how do we set the science up, as you say, and what's their role on the way through it. One point I was going to make earlier, Jack, and I'll just comment on now, is there's also a role on us to keep farmers updated and communicate the science on the way through rather than waiting to the end. And that's something, we're thinking, very hard about how do we continue to improve that. Farmers are dissecting and disseminating information very differently today. So, podcast is a great example of that. It's another channel to get the message out there. But communicating the science and what we're doing on behalf of farmers doesn't wait till the science is done. So how do we do that and continue to keep farmers updated, which also keeps them engaged in the science, Bruce, as well? I think it's critical.
And if we have farmers listening that want to get involved and aren't already involved, how would they go about that?
The best thing to do is to talk to your local DairyNZ area manager. That's the best place to start. There are people on the ground in the regions. All their details are obviously on our website. You'll know a lot of them anyway. But that's where the genesis of the relationship is. You also know some of our scientists directly. So we're open to farmers, reaching out and contacting us around that. Great example of that is we've actually got a couple of workshops coming up around some of the co-design work into heat stress. One, I think, on the 12th of June in Ashburton, and a couple of weeks later after field days on the 24th of June here in Hamilton.
And talking to your area manager, like we often go out to our area managers and ask, do you know a farmer that's interested in this? So then, we close that loop. Campbell, what excites you most about the role science will play in our sector's future?
Helping to solve some of the problems that we don't even know or challenges, today. I mean, that future focus, being clear about the challenges we face, but challenges also on the other side have opportunity. And science is really important in my mind to unlocking that, opportunity. We've talked today about how that comes through then into adoptable and scalable solutions that farmers can have confidence in because some of the testing and trial work's been done in our science. So, ongoing levy investment for that means that dairy in New Zealand can stay ahead of some of those global competitors by staying both innovative and agile. And that's really important because that's farmers' investment. And we've got to be really clear that we're investing that into the right places on your behalf as farmers. It's what can the collective do together that no farmer can do alone.
Bruce, if you were talking to a young farmer or someone just starting out, what would you say about why research matters to their future?
I'd probably make 2 points to them, Jack. The first is learn from history. So what if you look back, just as we've been doing today, how has science contributed to the position you're in? My second point would be just building on what Campbell said. Our dairy farmers are in an internationally highly competitive world. 95% of our milk goes offshore. If we don't keep ahead of the competitors, then we're in trouble. And they're investing large amounts of money in making their systems go faster. We need to do the same thing. And as well as staying competitive from a commercial cost of production and efficiency point of view, we've got to drive the things that our consumers and our neighbours want to see. So lower greenhouse gas intensity on our milk solids and a better and healthier environment for us all to live in. And science, in my mind, is one of the key elements to solving that. The third message to them would be get involved. Science will be better and more useful to you if you get involved in the process and contribute to the ongoing innovation in your sector.
And Bruce, I'm sure you talk to a lot of farmers that are involved. What motivates them? What tips them over? Because they do have to give up sometimes a bit of time, a bit of their cognitive energy.
We talked before about farmer-to-farmer learning, and I think the New Zealand dairy farmer, there's something about where we've come from, the history of being poor people, 50 or 60 years ago, and building this industry together, and the collaborative and cooperative spirit that's still there. I think the opportunity attracts great people. So we've got a lot of really smart and innovative people out there on farm, and they enjoy this. Dairy farming is what they do, but they enjoy the stimulation of the science and the research and learning and kicking ideas in and taking them back to their farm. I spent a bit of time with Alvin Reid over the years, and Alvin was a director of Dexcel and of LIC. Alvin told me he never went to a farm where he didn't learn something. And I think that kind of learning culture and innovation is core to it. So my experience is these farmers love it. They love the science. They love the innovation. They love thinking about the future.
The other point I'd just add in as well, I think it is, Bruce, you've captured it really well, but it's deepened the psyche of our nation. And if I look back to, the fact that we export 95 to 97% of what we produce, and we've been exporting for 150 years around the globe, and there's this continuous innovation because we have to stay really connected to what the market signals are. So that's an important one. But farmers are also intergenerational, and they want to generally leave their farms better for the next generation than when they took over the reins. And that's deep in the psyche of New Zealand farmers. And I think your point around the collective effort and the cooperative spirit in this country, and particularly in this sector, is important because people today stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us, and then they, hold the baton for a period of time, and then we hand it over to the next generation. And our industry plays such an important part in the fabric of New Zealand, economically, socially, and in the communities that farmers, live and work in. And I think that's one of the things that makes this sector so exciting to work in. And there's also, incredible career paths that still exist. The ability to build wealth and build a business in the sector is second to none. And that still exists. It looks a bit different today than it did generations before, and it'll look different in the future. But the fundamentals and that psyche of the sector, I think, is something we have to hold on to.
And I guess in celebrating all this research, it's also, we're celebrating the farmers that have been called in, and they have given up their time and resources in the past in the name of progressing not just their own business, but our whole sector and their community. Okay, so as we wrap up this 100th episode, what's one thing that gives you real confidence about where New Zealand dairy is heading?
Farmers' adaptability, that innovation mindset, that willingness to engage, to think about the problems, but not only the problems, what are the solutions, and how does science unlock some of that? I've already talked today quite a bit about the collective strength, but the levy's a great example of a model like that. When I talk to some international visitors who come to see us here at DairyNZ, the collective investment on behalf of farmers into science and research is something that's envied by other parts around the world. And I think that's exciting. We've got to keep working hard as DairyNZ to do that and focus on delivering real world impact for our farmers through science. And that's what we get out of bed every day to do. So, I think that's unique. That gives, a lot of confidence about the future.
Yeah, I agree, Campbell. I'm fundamentally confident about the future at a macro level. If you look at global demand and supply, I think we're in a good position in terms of scarcity of high-quality milk. But beyond that, to capture those benefits, it comes down to people. So why am I confident? I'm confident because I think the people in the sector are fantastic. Whether it's the farmers, as we've talked about, our young research team, coming through at DairyNZ, and all the wider people we tap into in New Zealand and all around the world, just some great people, and people who are highly committed to the opportunities and solving the problems in the dairy sector. I'm really looking forward to becoming a grumpy old levy payer and watching them succeed.
Awesome.
Yeah. I don't think you'll become too grumpy, Bruce. And look, on behalf of all the farmers out there, also thank you to you for all of your tireless effort. We know you started back at MAF days in the early 80s, and you've given us a good history ride through that. But on behalf of everyone, thanks for your contribution as well. We need smart scientists who want to work for the benefit of the sector, and you should be proud of how you've contributed around that.
Thanks, Campbell. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you both. That's a wrap on our 100th episode of Talking Dairy. What a way to celebrate the milestone. A big thanks to Bruce and Campbell for their insights, their stories, and for reminding us that staying ahead doesn't happen by accident. It takes smart thinking, good science, and a whole lot of on-farm grit. What really stuck with me is this. New Zealand dairy farmers have always taken science and made it work in the real world, testing it, tweaking it, turning it into results. And that's what's kept us out in front. And it's how we'll keep moving forward together. For DairyNZ too, we know we must keep focused on adoptable solutions to support that. If you're heading to field days at Mystery Creek this June, drop by the DairyNZ site in the pavilion. Come say hi and check out what's new. We're also at the MPI Science for Farmers site and the Advocacy Hub. Thanks again for listening and for being part of the journey. Here's to the next 100 episodes. 100 not out. Mā te wā. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Talking Dairy. Make sure to hit follow so you can keep up to date with our latest episodes. You can also keep up with DairyNZ News on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn, or go to our website and sign up for our fortnightly DairyNZ News emails. As always, if you have any feedback on this podcast or have some ideas for future topics or guests to have on the show, please email us at talkingdairy@dairynz.co.nz. Mā te wā, Mōri ora, catch you next time.